Northern Audits Pet World, starring Northern Audits, some posh cats, and not so clever dogs, written and directed by Mr. Chips.
Disclaimer: no cats, dogs, or numbers were harmed in the making of this story. All animals were pampered, and the numbers were kept safely in their numerical pens.
Once upon a time, there was a meticulous YouTuber named Northern Audits. Known for his sharp eye and precise calculations, he was the kind of man who could spot an unbalanced ledger from a mile away. His life was a routine of numbers, reports, and the occasional cup of strong black coffee. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Northern Audits fell asleep at his desk. When he awoke, he was no longer in his familiar office. Instead, he found himself in a bustling city, unlike any he'd ever seen. The buildings were made of giant scratching posts, and the roads were lined with chew toys. The billboards advertised the latest in gourmet kibble and luxury pet beds. Confused and disoriented, Northern Audits began to explore. It wasn't long before he realized he was in a world ruled entirely by cats and dogs. Cats, with their aloof elegance, sat in high-rise offices sipping on catnip tea, while dogs, ever enthusiastic, patrolled the streets, wagging tails and barking orders. The city was split into two factions: the Feline Finance District, where cats meticulously managed the world's wealth, and the Canine Compliance Zone, where dogs enforced rules with an iron paw. Northern Audits was quickly noticed by a group of corgis in uniform, their tiny legs moving at a surprisingly fast pace as they surrounded him. "Halt! Who are you, and what are you doing in the Canine Compliance Zone without a leash?" barked the leader, a stern-looking corgi with a badge. I'm Northern Audits," he stammered, unsure of what else to say. The corgis exchanged puzzled glances. "Northern Audits? Never heard of you. Do you have a permit to be here?" Before he could answer, a sleek Siamese cat appeared, her fur glistening in the sunlight. "Corgis, please leave the poor man alone. I'm Felina, CFO of the Feline Finance District. We've been expecting him." "Expecting me?" Northern Audits was now completely baffled. "Yes, of course," Felina purred. "You see, our world has been facing a crisis. The ledgers are a mess, and neither the cats nor the dogs can figure out why. We need an expert to audit our books and bring balance to our accounts." Reluctantly, Northern Audits agreed. After all, auditing was what he did best. But as he delved into the financial records, he realized that the cats and dogs had very different ideas of what constituted a balanced budget. The cats had a penchant for spending lavishly on luxury items, while the dogs insisted on allocating the majority of funds to bones and fire hydrants. Days turned into weeks as Northern Audits tried to mediate between the two factions. Every time he thought he'd found a solution, a new problem would arise: a missing shipment of tuna, an unauthorized purchase of squeaky toys, or a mysterious overdraft at the Bark Bank. One day, as Northern Audits was poring over the latest discrepancies, a massive, fluffy Persian cat entered his office, accompanied by a regal Great Dane. They introduced themselves as the leaders of their respective factions. "Northern Audits, we've reviewed your findings," the Persian cat meowed, "and while we appreciate your efforts, we've decided that perhaps it's best if we simplify things." "Yes," the Great Dane rumbled in agreement. "We've agreed to settle our differences the old-fashioned way." Northern Audits looked up, curious. "The old-fashioned way?" "A chase!" they exclaimed in unison. And so, the entire city turned out to watch as the Great Dane and the Persian cat squared off in a high-stakes game of chase. The winner would decide the fate of the economy. As the chase ensued, with the cat darting nimbly through alleys and the dog galloping in hot pursuit, Northern Audits couldn't help but laugh. It was all so absurd. Here he was, a human auditor, trapped in a world run by cats and dogs, watching them settle financial disputes with a game of tag. In the end, the cat managed to outwit the dog, and it was declared that the Feline Finance District would have the final say on all future budgets. The dogs, though disappointed, accepted their defeat with typical canine grace, and peace was restored. As a reward for his hard work, Northern Audits was granted a one-way ticket back to his own world. Before he left, the cats and dogs gathered to thank him, presenting him with a golden calculator as a token of their appreciation. When Northern Audits finally awoke, back at his desk, he wasn't sure if it had all been a dream, but the golden calculator sitting beside his coffee cup suggested otherwise. From that day on, Northern Audits kept a closer eye on his surroundings, always half expecting a corgi in uniform to pop up with an audit request. And though he never returned to that strange world, he couldn't help but smile whenever he saw a dog chasing a cat, wondering what the balance sheet would look like this time.
I just love the smell